Hey, good morning, Mount Gilead. Great to be with you this morning. Quick question for you. When have you heard words you weren't expecting to hear? When were you caught off guard by someone's words or someone's questions? Sometimes we hear unexpected words in a positive way. The first time your future spouse says, "I love you." Or your boss says, "We want to give you a raise." Your teacher says, "You're one of my favorite students." Those are good words to be surprised by. Other times we hear unexpected words and it's painful. When your realtor calls and says they didn't accept your offer. Or when your boss calls you in and says, "We don't think we can keep you." Or when your doctor calls you and says, "We found a mass and we think it may be cancer." In life, sometimes we hear things we just weren't expecting. Throughout his life, Jesus often said unexpected things, and perhaps none more surprising than when he said to his disciples, "I'm leaving." Those unexpected words came at an unexpected time. You remember the scene. The disciples had gathered with Jesus for supper. We call it the Last Supper. They had been eating and drinking, talking and laughing. And then Jesus surprised them more than he ever had before. He said, "I'm leaving." Naturally, Peter's response was, "Lord, let us go with you. If you're leaving, we want to go too." But Jesus didn't let him go. But he did tell them one day they would. He told them he was leaving, but there was a day coming when he would return. Let me read John chapter 14, verses 1 to 4. "Don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and trust also in me. There's more than enough room in my Father's home. If this were not so, would I have told you that I am going to prepare a place for you? When everything is ready, I will come and get you so that you will always be with me where I am, and you know the way to where I'm going." In the midst of their fear, Jesus simply says, "Don't be afraid." It's the core of the first advice Christ gives to his disciples, but it was more than that. He said, "Don't allow your hearts to be troubled by fear." Make no mistake, it's not a coincidence that Jesus begins his last conversation with the disciples by addressing the issue of fear. The disciples had become men of fear, and we can relate, can't we? Today, we have become a nation gripped by fear. We have fears about terrorism, fears about flying, fears of using computers, fears about the economy, fears about the environment, fears of a virus, fears of the unknown. Our minds keep us up at night as we wrestle with fears. What if I get cancer? What if my spouse leaves me? What if my children rebel? And all of us wrestle with fear. Some, unfortunately, have been consumed by fear and today don't even leave their houses because of how afraid they've become. And all of us probably will continue to wrestle with fear because we're living in a fallen world. But the comforting words of Jesus are, "Don't be afraid. Don't let your hearts be troubled." You remember in Psalm 141, David writes, "My eyes are fixed on you, O sovereign Lord. In you I take refuge." In the conversation Jesus had with the disciples, he confirmed what David had said. Jesus said, "When you're troubled, believe in God." But he didn't stop there. He also said, "Trust in God, but trust also in me." If David could believe in the ultimate goodness of God, how much more can we? Jesus is the proof that God is willing to give us everything he has to give. Paul writes in Romans chapter 8, verse 32, "He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things?" In other words, when you have fears, consider the gift that God gave to the world, the gift of his Son, which proved to us God's perfect love. 1 John 4:18 says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment." Friends, Jesus is the perfect definition of love. You know that. And if he's the definition, what that verse is really saying is that there is no fear in Jesus. He drives out all fear. Now that's a promise from Scripture. Today, let's live like we believe that promise. When we have fear, when we have worries, when we have doubts, consider Jesus, and let's allow him to cast out all of our fears. I hope that brings you some encouragement today. We'll see you on Sunday.